What's going on YouTube? Mr. Wheels here once again, welcoming you to another edition of Sports Talk. First of all, I want to say Happy New Year to everyone. 2015 is going to be a great year. Hope everyone had a good time last night. Hope everyone was safe. In this edition of Sports Talk, we're going to be talking about the 2015 World Junior Hockey Championship and what I like to call Quarterfinals Day, because all the games for the quarterfinals are just one day. Like, they're all just one day. But before I get into the quarterfinal matchups and all that, I'm going to leave my regular, asking to subscribe and all that until the very end. Hope that you'll stick with me till the end. I want to recap the tournament to this point first. So far we've seen... it's been a bit of a different World Junior Tournament to this point. We've seen the returning gold medalist from Finland not have the greatest tournament. They've only got one win. They beat Germany, and Germany's been a bit of a disappointment with 4 straight losses, but they're in the quarterfinals. And then on the other hand, we've seen teams like Denmark get their first World Junior win in overtime. The Danes were ahead against the Russians in their first game. That game went into overtime. And speaking of the Russians, they haven't had a bad tournament per se, but they haven't, in my opinion, they haven't given the effort that we're used to seeing from the Russians. And then, of course, there's, you got to say the gold medal favorites in Canada and Sweden. Both teams 4-0 in this tournament so far through the preliminary round. And, of course, you've always got dark horses like, I'm going to say the biggest dark horse in this tournament is the Czech Republic. Don't know how many people saw their 4-1 win over Russia yesterday, but it was something else. And, I mean, the Russians didn't, in my opinion, they didn't bring their best effort versus the Czechs. But, I mean, the Czech Republic, they've got this one guy, Varanin, I think his name is. I think that's how you say his last name. And he was all over the ice, creating lots of chances for the Czechs. But he ended up with just an assist. It was everybody else on their team that really stepped up to beat the Russians. So they are my dark horse going into the quarterfinals. And let's get into the quarterfinal matchup, shall we? There's no bye this year in the tournament, so every team is in the quarterfinals, which I think for a lot of the teams in this tournament is a good thing. It's good for international hockey. The first matchup, we've got Switzerland and Germany, and I already talked about how big of a disappointment to me the Germans have been. Really missing Leon Draisaitl in this tournament. The Swiss, on the other hand, they were the losers to the Danes in overtime, and that was kind of a shock to me, because usually the Swiss in recent years have been a dark horse. They've had upsets over Canada in international hockey. So it was surprising that they lost to Denmark, but in the first quarterfinal matchup, they are my favorite and my pick to beat Germany, just because the Germans have had a disappointing tournament to this point, and I think it's just because of the format that the Germans have even made it to the quarterfinals. Otherwise, they would be relegated. Let's move on to Russia and the USA. We know this is a big rivalry. Obviously, going back to the 1980 Miracle on Ice, where the U.S. upset the Russians. This matchup for me is happening a little bit too early. Actually, there's a lot of that, as you're going to see with the other matchups. Russia and USA, I think, would be better as a semifinal matchup or a bronze medal match. But given the fact that there's no bye anymore in the tournament, we're probably going to see the matchups that we want to see later in the tournament in the quarterfinals or in the preliminary round. That's just the way it is probably going to be from now on. Now, let's get to who I think has the advantage. On paper, it would definitely be the U.S. I think they're going to be very hungry after their disappointing loss to Canada in their New Year's Eve game. They were making the comeback versus the Canadians, and in this quarterfinal matchup, if they bring that effort that they had against Canada into this game versus Russia, I think they'll come out on top, because Russia, to me, going back to their pre-tournament game against Canada, that wasn't even their best. I didn't even think that was their best effort in the pre-tournament game. It was their goalie that stood on his head, and that's basically what saved the Russians so far in this tournament. And he was pulled. Their number one goalie was pulled in the game versus the Czechs. So if the Russians want to win, they're going to need their best effort so far in this tournament to beat the U.S. team. Not as good of a U.S. team as they may have been last year, but the Russians are still going to really have to bring it if they want to beat the U.S., because I think the U.S. is going to try to upset Canada in the semifinals if it ends up that way. Let's move on to the third quarterfinal matchup, Finland and Sweden. Again, this is a rematch of the gold medal game last year, I believe, and it's a great rivalry once again. These countries are they're neighbors in Scandinavia, and no one really needs to talk about the rivalry between Finland and Sweden. But I will say that once again, this is a game that's happening too early in the tournament. Ideally, it would be better as a medal round game if they met for a medal or in the semifinals to determine gold medal and who was playing for the gold medal and bronze medal. As for who's going to win, it's contrasting styles. The Finns have they're the returning gold medal favorites or gold medalists from last year. They haven't had a great tournament. They've only got one win. They've had a couple disappointing losses to Canada and an overtime loss to the U.S. and a disappointing loss to Slovakia. But I think if there was ever a time for the Finns to show up, it would be versus Sweden to pull off an overwhelming upset, because they are overwhelming underdogs in this game. And I think from what I've heard the commentators say, they have a better team than what they've shown so far, and it's been their goalies that have kept them in games. So it's time for their offense to step up. As for Sweden, I mean, the only place to go for them right now is down, because they are red hot. William Nylander right in the middle of all the Swedish offense, and I think they're on a collision course in the gold medal game with Canada. But I think if there was ever a time for them to be upset in this tournament, it would be versus Finland. So I'm going to take Finland, just because I would like to see a Finnish upset over Sweden. I think it's no question that Sweden's the favorite going into this game, so I'm pulling for an upset just because I think it would be a breath of fresh air for the tournament. And I think that you can't underestimate Finland. They have a better team than what they've shown so far. Now let's move on to another rivalry game that again is probably happening a little bit too early in this tournament, but it's Slovakia and the Czech Republic. Again, no need to go into history. These teams used to be a country, used to be known as Czechoslovakia. So I think there's no question that there's a bit of a rivalry there. And again, Slovakia, I think they've got a better team than what they've shown so far. But they're going against what I would consider my dark horse in this tournament, the Czech Republic, who had a pretty dominant win over the Russians. So the Slovaks are in deep, and that could be translated into deep trouble in this game. I think they're lucky to even be in the quarterfinals, even though they do have an upset win over Finland. So an upset is possible here. I'm not counting anybody out, but I think the puck stops here for the Slovaks, and I consider the Czechs to be the favorite in this game and the team that will take it and move into the semifinals. Now let's move on to the last game, and that is, of course, Denmark and Canada. And I think it goes without saying that Canada is overwhelming favorites, catastrophic favorites versus Denmark. But again, you can never count a team out. And, Denmark does have an upset win over Switzerland to get their first World Junior win. And, I mean, you never know. Canada, again, much like Sweden, has been red hot. And, the question is, can they go up from here? Can they get better? I mean, I think what needs to be pointed out is what's being dubbed the DDR line of Duclair, Domi, and Reinhardt has really taken a lot of pressure off of guys like Connor McDavid. I think Sam Reinhart has been more of the story in this tournament, and of course, I say Sam Reinhart because of all the little things he does. He's always in a good position. He doesn't hurt you defensively, but obviously Max Domi has been the offensive story in this tournament for Canada, and I expect him to continue that in the quarterfinals. I don't expect it to necessarily be a blowout versus Denmark, and that may be me being generous, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh yeah, Canada's going to smash them, because it is the quarterfinals. The chips are down for a lot of these teams, and I know they would love to upset Canada. I know I'm not talking about a lot of names of players and stuff, but that's because I really don't know a lot of the players from other teams other than Canada. But what I will say is I think you can rest assured that Canada will pull out a victory versus Denmark, and Denmark's only hope is to keep it scoreless or to try to get ahead early. But we'll see. I mean, this is just speculation and predictions. So all in all, it's going to be a very good quarterfinals. And at this time, hope you've stayed with me to this point. Usually I do this at the start of the video, but I would ask for you to give this video a like, and please subscribe to my channel. I can really use the support. Please follow me on Twitter at SledgeHat86, and give my Facebook fan page a like, Mr. Wheels86. That's all I have for you today, guys. It's going to be a great quarterfinals. Hope you enjoy all the games, and I will see you next time.